Russia's launched a deadly attack on Ukraine, targeting a military training center with these Iskander ballistic missiles, and Ukraine has also hit back, targeting the Russian energy facilities. Now, Zelensky says that the American President Donald Trump is considering to supply long-range weapons to Kiev, widening Kiev's counter-offensive. And our next board gets you more.
Ukraine is under intense pressure. Russia is raining one aerial assault after another. Deadly drones and missiles prowl Ukrainian skies, pounding Kyiv with impunity. Moscow is now going after Ukraine's military and defense production sites, hoping to break the juggernaut driving Kyiv's counter-offensive. 2 Iskander ballistic missiles rained fire on a military training center, leaving several Ukrainian armed personnel injured. Russian strikes also hit a power substation, drone storage and launch sites. Iskander is a short-range ballistic missile with a range of 500 kilometers and capable of carrying conventional and nuclear payloads. Kyiv also hit back at Moscow, striking multiple oil facilities and drone production sites. Kyiv's arsenal could soon receive a big boost. Ukrainian President Zelensky says Trump has agreed to consider supplying long-range weapons to Kyiv, bringing targets deep inside Russia under Ukraine's reach. Trump says Ukraine has done a good job and could even recapture lost territories, a big shift from his earlier stance of both Ukraine and Russia having to cede land to each other. Trump also told Zelensky to respond to Russian strikes on energy infra with tit-for-tat strikes. But Moscow is undeterred. The Kremlin says any idea of recapturing lost territories is a mistake. With recent incursions in NATO airspace, Moscow's message is clear. It can widen the theater of war beyond Ukraine's borders, leaving NATO and Europe to scramble for their defenses. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Professor Peter Kuznick, who's the Professor of History and Director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at the American University. Professor Kuznick, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this broadcast. Now, I want you to weigh in on what the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said, where he has said that in private, Donald Trump and he have been having talks, and he expects that the Americans could give the Ukrainians more long-range weapons, which the Ukrainians can then deploy on certain key strategic sites inside of Russia. In your assessment, is this something that Donald Trump is willing to do?
Trump is unpredictable. He's capable of doing anything, which is what makes him so dangerous. And so he could certainly provide those weapons, as Biden did. You have to remember, back in 2022, when Ukraine was having its counteroffensive, the CIA reported they thought it was a 50-50 chance this was going to turn into a nuclear war at that point. We had that same fear in 2024 when Biden started to provide the ATACMS missiles to Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia. Trump stopped providing them, but now, he changed his tune so dramatically over the past week, where before we looked like we might be coming closer to a resolution. After the meeting in Alaska, it looked possible that Ukraine would cede the territory that Russia controlled, as well as Crimea. Ukraine would say no NATO, and the Europeans would say the same thing, and we'd figure out a security formula. Now Trump is saying that Ukraine can win back all that lost territory. That's insanity. But what it does, the implication of that I like is that, because Trump said that Russia is a paper tiger, that they're not as strong as we thought they were. Well, the Europeans have been scaring their population with the idea that if Putin wins in Ukraine, He's going to gobble up one piece of Europe after another. And I've been saying that's madness. But given how difficult it's been in Ukraine, does Putin really want to take on NATO? Of course not. But they've been using that to scare the population, to keep providing the aid, and to increase military spending. Now it's clear that Russia does not have that capability. So I think that's the important implication of that. There's no way that Ukraine is going to take back that territory from Russia.
Interesting. And you also mentioned what Donald Trump earlier in this week has said. He's referred to Russia as a paper tiger. And he also went on to, as you pointed out, that Ukraine can retake those territories. Now, some would expect that this is the American president who's now playing a bit of a mind game here with the Russian president, where he is perhaps indicating that if the Russians do not negotiate, then the Americans could increase their involvement in this war. Do you think that could likely happen?
You could read it that way. You could read it the opposite way of Trump washing his hands of the whole thing and saying that it's the end of U.S. involvement, let the Europeans handle this now. So Trump speaks out of both sides of his mouth, which is what makes it difficult to assess what he really means in that case. But so he has reversed himself entirely on this, at least in his rhetoric. In terms of behavior, there's no actual commitment. There's no change in U.S. policy. There's no additional that the U.S. is providing. He says if the Europeans pay for it, the U.S. will provide it then. But this is not what we saw under Biden, which was a much more fulsome commitment on the part of the United States.
Interesting indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Kuznick, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
Thank you for having me.